Stories Philippines Podcast.
Imagine a place that is bright, clean, and cool. A place where the oppressive Philippine heat melts away into the hum of air conditioning. This place, in the 1990s and the early 2000s, became more than just a place to shop. It became the new public square, the modern town plaza, the ultimate destination for every Filipino family on a Sunday afternoon, the shopping mall. But what happens when the light and safety of that new shiny structure are only a thin veneer, masking something ancient and hungry in the shadows below? What if the promise of progress comes with a hidden, monstrous price? I am Paul, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast. The early 2000s in the Philippines were an age of towering glass-walled dreams. Old-school public markets and fiestas were slowly but surely yielding their social crown to the behemoth shopping complexes. These malls weren't just commercial centers. They were cultural monuments. They had cinemas, arcades, and most importantly, giant, sprawling food courts, a kaleidoscope of every local and international flavor imaginable. They were symbols of a booming economy, a step toward a more global, modern Philippines. But where rapid change occurs, fear often follows. An unnerving, creeping suspicion that something is being lost, or worse, something dark is being invited in. This fear, bubbling up from the collective subconscious, often takes a tangible, terrifying form. It manifests in whispers, in rumors, in a kind of mass hysteria that spreads faster than any tabloid headline could print. Our story begins in a mall that, for the sake of privacy and to honor the unsettling anonymity of the rumor itself, we will call Victory Central Mall. It was one of the biggest, newest complexes to pierce the Manila skyline in the early 2000s, a fortress of consumerism built on what many whispered was once an old, forgotten cemetery, or perhaps an ancient, sacred farming ground. No one could quite confirm the history, but the unease was palpable, baked into the concrete foundation. In the year 2005, the urban legend of the mall serpent reached a fever pitch. It wasn't just a story, it was an explanation for the mall's staggering success, and specifically for one unsettling detail: the alleged disappearance of certain young female employees, usually cashiers or stock clerks, whose absence was quietly swept under the rug as a simple resignation or transfer. The rumor was vivid, almost cinematic in its detail. It spoke of a secret, opulent room, a lair hidden deep beneath the mall's foundation, accessible only by a hidden elevator in the manager's office or a reinforced door in the lowest level of the parking garage. And in that lair lived the creature, a gargantuan humanoid serpent, sometimes described as having the upper body of a handsome man and the lower body of a gigantic python, a modern-day Bathala of the basement, a creature of immense power and wealth. The serpent, so the story went, was not merely a monster, it was the guardian of the mall's prosperity, a necessary evil required by the mall's owner, a real estate tycoon of course, to maintain its massive profits. And what was the serpent's nourishment? Human sacrifice. More specifically, a young, attractive female chosen at random and delivered through a cleverly disguised trapdoor, usually located chillingly enough in the fitting rooms of one of the major department stores. Think of the irony. The mall was the beacon of modernity, and yet the myth that grew up around it was deeply rooted in ancient Filipino folklore, a terrifying echo of the past. The serpent of the mall is a direct, twisted descendant of the Bakunawa, the giant sea serpent in Visayan mythology that devours the moon during an eclipse. It's also kin to the sawa, the massive pythons common in the Philippine jungles, animals that have always held a simultaneous fear and reverence in the local belief system. But the most direct ancestor is likely the myth of the manananggal or the aswang, creatures that feed on human life to sustain their own dark power, often operating in secret, seemingly normal during the day. This fear of a secret, hidden monster mirrors an international psychological phenomenon, the crocodile man or gator man urban legends in the United States, specifically in the sewer systems of major cities, where the monster represents the unknown depths and dangers of the urban environment. In the Philippines, however, the monster wasn't in the sewers. It was in the shopping center, the symbol of global progress. It wasn't just fear of the unknown, it was the fear of uncontrolled capitalism. It was the collective anxiety that the sudden immense wealth being generated by these foreign influence developments could only be sustained by something unnatural and predatory. One of the most persistent and perhaps most tragic threads of this rumor involved a specific young woman whom we will call Cecilia Reyes Dizon. Cecilia was 18, fresh out of high school, and working her first job as a sales attendant in the mall's largest department store, eager to help her family. She was known to her friends as bright, meticulous, and always carrying a positive attitude, even after a 12-hour shift. In late January of 2005, Cecilia vanished. Not suddenly in a fitting room trapdoor, but simply didn't come home after her evening shift. Her co-workers and the mall administration said she clocked out and walked away. Her distraught family, however, insisted she would never abandon them. They plastered missing posters everywhere, and it was in the vacuum of a concrete, satisfying answer that the serpent rumor found its most potent fuel. The local tabloids, sensing the collective dread, ran sensationalist, often fabricated stories that linked Cecilia's disappearance directly to the monstrous owner of the mall. The Manila Gazette, a notorious purveyor of lurid tales, ran a front-page story with the headline, "Blood Money." Did the Mal Serpent claim an 18-year-old soul? It was irresponsible, certainly, but it resonated. It gave a name and a face, Cecilia's face, to the faceless dread of the creature in the basement. Think of the psychology at play here. In the absence of true investigative journalism and before the instant decentralized communication of social media, the only source of truth for many Filipinos was the printed word of the sensationalist papers and the oral tradition of the urban legend. It was a time when tabloid journalism had unbelievable power, amplifying whispers into roars, feeding the mass hysteria surrounding rapid modernization. The fear wasn't just of the snake man, it was the fear that the powerful could literally get away with murder to ensure their continued dominance and wealth. It was a fear that every hardworking low-wage employee, every hopeful consumer could be a sacrificial lamb to the altar of global hypercapitalism. This psychological underpinning made the story impervious to facts and police reports. The monster in the basement was the perfect metaphor for the monster in the boardroom. Cecilia Reyes Dizon's case was never definitively solved, and as the months turned into years, the chilling rumor of the cryptid of the Cafeteria, the serpent of the mall, became a fixture of Manila's modern mythos. It was a story told in hushed tones over cheap coffee in that very same food court, a terrifying reminder that even in the brightest, newest places, the darkness of the old world and the darkness of human greed could still hold sway. Now pause and think about the sheer force of this story. It's a primal scream against power. It's folklore dressed up in neon lights, and it holds an incredible lesson about how we as a society process the anxiety of change. But we need to dig deeper. We need to explore the specific cultural parallels and the strange investigative attempts that try to bring light to this subterranean shadow. The story of the mall serpent continues, but before we venture into the hidden chambers and the folklore that sustains it, let me ask you to consider sharing your own stories of the unexplained, the historical oddity, or the personal terror that still haunts you. You can submit your own stories at storiesphilippines.com, and perhaps your own haunting tale will become the subject of a future episode. The foundation of the mall is deep, and the secrets it keeps are even deeper. We'll be right back. The fascination with the mall serpent is not a new phenomenon, it is merely an ancient fear wearing a contemporary suit. To truly understand why this cryptid seized the Filipino imagination in the 1990s and the early 2000s, we must trace its lineage back through the centuries, through the thick jungle mists and across the tidal flats of the archipelago. The serpent, or the giant python, is a figure of immense power in almost every indigenous Filipino belief system. It is never just a snake. It is a dragon, a god, or a guardian. In pre-colonial times, particularly among groups like the Lumat in Mindanao, the Bakunawa was the cosmic entity, often depicted as a colossal sea serpent or dragon, responsible for devouring the 7 moons. The ritual of banging pots and pans during an eclipse, a tradition still practiced in various forms, was not merely noise. It was an urgent plea to scare the Bakunawa into spinning the moon back out, saving the world from darkness. The serpent of the mall, residing in a deep subterranean lair and demanding beautiful sacrifices, is the modern urban incarnation of this cosmic devourer, merely trading the moon for human life and the ocean for a basement. The fear of the eclipse, the fear of total darkness and chaos, is now the fear of total economic and moral collapse, maintained by a creature that demands a tribute. Furthermore, we see a chilling parallel in the Moorish folklore of the southern Philippines. Stories speak of wealthy, powerful leaders or datus who made pacts with nature spirits or powerful genies to secure their prosperity and invincibility. This often involved a secret, unholy agreement that required an annual or periodic sacrifice. The mall serpent becomes the genie of the tycoon, a bargain sealed in blood, where the wealth pouring into the mall is the tangible reward for the ongoing human tragedy hidden beneath the polished floor tiles. It connects the fear of the monstrous with the fear of unchecked amoral power, a theme deeply rooted in the history of the region's feudal past. Internationally, this mythology is universal. Think of the Naga in South Asian cultures, serpentine demigods revered for their great wealth and mastery of the subterranean realm. They are guardians of treasure and water sources. The Mal serpent is the Filipino Naga, the guard of the Mal's treasure. Its immense profit and its wealth is protected by a subterranean presence that can only be appeased. The tale of the Minotaur in Greek mythology, hidden in a labyrinth and fed Athenian youth, also mirrors the Mal serpent's narrative perfectly, a monstrous secret in the core of a prosperous, powerful city, a dark necessity for continued dominance. What gave the Serpent of the Mall its terrifying modern specificity was the alleged royal bloodline, the idea that the creature was not a mere monster, but the twin brother of the mall's owner, born with a horrifying mutation. This twist provides a crucial theological and psychological dimension. In Filipino cultural beliefs, specifically in some provinces, the birth of twins can sometimes be viewed with a mix of awe and suspicion. The conjoined takanamantong monster's birth is often seen as a curse or a sign of something unnatural. By making the serpent a mutated secret twin, the story transforms the monster from an external threat into a dark family secret, a hidden shame. The mall's owner, therefore, is not merely a greedy businessman. He is Cain to his brother Abel, hiding his monstrous skin in a golden cage, using the very thing he is ashamed of to achieve ultimate power. This deepens the story, moving it from simple horror to Greek tragedy, suggesting that the root of this terror is not just corporate greed, but the corrupt heart of the family unit itself. The sheer sensory detail woven into the rumors was another key to its staying power. People whispered of the smell, a faint, lingering odor of sulfur or damp, metallic air that would occasionally waft up from the service elevator or a rarely opened maintenance door near the food court. They spoke of the sounds, a low, rhythmic scraping noise, or a deep, unsettling hiss that supposedly emanated from the air conditioning vents during the mall's quieter hours, long after the last shopper had left. These were the sensory anchors that made the abstract terror of a subterranean serpent feel real and immediate to the average Filipino shopper. The geographic descriptions amplified the horror. The tale often focused on the deepest parts of the mall, the vast, dimly lit expanse of the parking garage's lowest level, the labyrinthine network of service tunnels that connected the loading docks, and the grease-stained, oppressive heat of the main kitchen area that fed the sprawling food court. These were the liminal spaces of the mall, the areas meant to be unseen, the gears turning the consumer machine, which, in the narrative, became the thresholds to the monster's lair. Victory Central Mall in the public mind was no longer a place of joy. It was a carefully constructed veneer over a massive hollow space containing the source of their darkest fears. The disappearance of Cecilia Reyes Dizon in January of 2005 became the unimpeachable proof for the masses. Her clean-cut disappearance in a complex system became the perfect evidence for an invisible trapdoor. At this point, you might be asking yourself, was there any investigation? Did anyone actually go looking for this serpent? Yes. The story became so viral in the pre-social media age that it caused genuine concern among the mall's owners and the local government. There were unofficial and later official attempts to debunk the legend. A local television news magazine, aiming for sensationalism, dispatched a two-man crew, whom we'll call Noel and Dante, into the sub-levels of Victory Central Mall, hoping to catch a glimpse of a scaled horror or, at the very least, a ridiculous costume. Their investigation, which aired in March of 2005, only served to deepen the mystery. They filmed the vast echoing service tunnels, the massive industrial refrigeration units that could easily mask a trapdoor, and the sheer complexity of the air handling and ventilation system. The crew found no monster, of course, but what they did find was a deep, unsettling silence, punctuated by the metallic clang of industrial machinery and the unnerving low hum of the mall's immense power generator. They filmed a reinforced, unmarked steel door in the deepest basement, which a nervous security guard claimed led only to a sewage line access. The uncertainty they broadcast was far more frightening than any monster they could have found. The myth does not need proof. It thrives on doubt. The fear of the mall serpent reflects a profound cultural anxiety. It is the fear that the imported promise of modernity, the shiny, air-conditioned future, is fundamentally corrupt and demands a Filipino sacrifice to maintain itself. The creature is the price paid for a new world. The deep roots of this terror are fascinating, and the story of the mall serpent continues to evolve even today, years after the disappearance that solidified its place in the modern Philippine pantheon of fear. We will next look into the scientific and psychological perspective of mass hysteria and the modern paranormal investigations that attempted to find the truth. But before we dive into the science of fear, allow me to encourage you to support the work we do here. The research, the scripting, and the production of this podcast take countless hours to bring these haunting Filipino stories to you. You can find all the show notes and various support options in the description of this episode. Your support helps keep the lights on and the cryptids in the basement. When a rumor like the mall serpent takes hold, it's easy to dismiss it as simple superstition or tabloid excess. But from a scientific and psychological perspective, the phenomenon of the cryptid of the cafeteria is a powerful example of mass psychogenic illness, or as it's more commonly known, mass hysteria. It's a real, demonstrable response to stress, anxiety, and a feeling of powerlessness. Mass hysteria occurs when a collective fear or anxiety transforms into physical symptoms or shared delusions, often in the absence of any true external stimulus. In the case of the serpent of the mall, the anxiety was palpable and multifaceted. First, there was the fear of rapid foreign influence development. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, the construction of massive American-style shopping centers symbolized globalization. For many Filipinos, this represented a fundamental shift away from traditional Filipino life and toward an unknown, westernized future. This rapid change often bred resentment and suspicion. Psychologically, the serpent becomes the physical embodiment of that destructive foreign force, consuming the best and brightest of the local youth, like Cecilia Reyes Dizon, to sustain its new unnatural power structure. Second, the myth provided a coherent explanation for inexplicable events. The sudden disappearance of a young woman is a terrifying, chaotic, and often unsolved tragedy. The police might classify it as a runaway case or a simple missing person, leaving the family and the community with no closure. The serpent story, however grotesque, provides a clear, satisfying narrative resolution. She wasn't lost, she was taken. She was a sacrifice to a specific entity. This is an uncomfortable truth, but for the human mind, a concrete horror is often easier to process than a terrifying random ambiguity. It imposes order on chaos. Third, the pre-social media information landscape acted as an incubator. In 2005, without the immediate fact-checking and debunking capabilities of platforms like Twitter and Facebook, the primary amplifiers were tabloid newspapers and word of mouth. The sensationalist media would print a story to sell papers, and the oral tradition would adapt and embellish it with local flavor. This creates a powerful feedback loop where the rumor becomes self-mallocating. You hear a story, you read a confirming headline, you see a reinforced steel door in the basement, you know it must be true. We can analyze the human-serpent hybrid through a Jungian psychological lens. The serpent is one of humanity's oldest archetypes, the shadow. It represents the primitive, instinctual, and often dangerous aspects of the unconscious mind. The hybrid form, the beautiful man and the terrifying serpent, is the perfect symbol for hidden duality in deceit. It suggests that the most terrifying evil wears a mask of charm and sophistication, exactly like the polished, inviting facade of the modern shopping mall. The serpent is the beautiful lie, the man is the predatory truth. Furthermore, the serpent myth served as a cultural critique against the powerful elite. In a society grappling with economic disparities, the rumor offered a way for the powerless to articulate their grievances against the wealthy owners who seemed untouchable. The wealth of the mall, symbolized by its opulence and success, was literally built on the bodies of the working class. This narrative functions as a psychological defense mechanism, creating a shared fantasy that validates the resentment and distrust of corporate power. The story's focus on the fitting rooms as the point of no return is psychologically potent. The fitting room is a space of vulnerability where a person is exposed, alone, and focused entirely on their physical self. It is a moment of private inspection in a highly public space, making it the perfect chilling threshold for an unseen predator. It turns a mundane act of consumerism into a risk of being consumed. In the mid-2000s, as the rumor intensified, there were even reports of people experiencing somatic symptoms related to the fear. Mall employees, especially young female cashiers, reported sudden, inexplicable feelings of nausea, dizzy spells, and even temporary paralysis when standing near specific service elevators or the fitting room area. These are classic, measurable symptoms of mass hysteria, the body manifesting psychological distress. The fear of being consumed literally led to a feeling of physical sickness. In the pursuit of proof, various groups claiming to be paranormal investigators attempted to breach the mystery. One of the more organized attempts, which we will call the Manila Urban Spectre Unit, attempted an investigation in late 2006, well after the initial panic had subsided. The unit focused less on the physical serpent and more on the psychic residue left by the alleged sacrifices. They used equipment like electromagnetic field meters and digital voice recorders in the deep basement levels of Victory Central Mall. Their findings, of course, were inconclusive, but the very act of their investigation provided another layer of fuel for the legend. They reported high EMF spikes near the reinforced door and captured a low-frequency noise on their audio, which one investigator, a man named Jerome Alcantara Samonte, insisted was an infrasound moan. Scientific analysis would suggest that these EMF spikes were almost certainly caused by the enormous electrical conduits, generators, and industrial motors required to power a mall of that size, and the infrasound was simply industrial machinery noise. But the psychological impact was immense. For believers, the high EMF wasn't power, it was the monster's bioenergy. The infrasound wasn't a motor, it was the serpent's hungry breathing. The investigators, with their scientific-looking tools, unintentionally legitimized the hunt for the non-existent creature. This is the power of a deeply ingrained myth. It consumes facts and spits out confirmation. The scientific explanation falls flat against the powerful, anxiety-reducing narrative of the monster in the basement. The story of the mall serpent is a tragic and compelling look into how a community externalizes its fear of social change and elite corruption into a primal, folklore-rooted creature. It is a reminder that some of the most powerful horrors aren't flesh and blood, but the anxieties we share. Kiyong Arbonakan, we're gonna take a moment now to talk about how you can support this podcast. We dedicate ourselves to digging up these haunting Philippine stories and bringing them to you with respect and detail. You can access exclusive extended cuts of our episodes, bonus interviews, and behind-the-scenes content by joining our community on Patreon. Look for the link in the description. The enduring nature of the mall serpent myth, like all great folklore, hinges on its ability to ground the supernatural in highly specific, recognizable geographic locations. Victory Central Mall, in the public imagination, became less a building and more a meticulously mapped labyrinth of dread. To fully appreciate the terrifying setting, we must walk through the architecture of anxiety. The shopping mall is designed to be a bubble, sealed off from the heat and chaos of the outside world. Yet the myth reintroduces chaos in the most terrifying way, from within and below. The story consistently focuses on the three specific geographic zones of the mall that became synonymous with the monster's territory. First, the food court, the cryptid of the cafeteria's namesake. This immense space, a central gathering point, is ironically the most public yet also the most vulnerable location. Below the food court are the massive, complex systems of the mall, the vast grease traps, the centralized plumbing, the industrial washing facilities, and the high-voltage electrical rooms. The legend places the serpent's lair directly beneath the feet of the consuming public. The floor you stood on, eating your halo-halo or your fast food burger, was the roof of the monster's cage. This proximity creates a terrifying intimacy, transforming the joy of eating into a subtle act of defiance against the predator below. Second, the loading docks and service tunnels. These are the mall's arteries, the places where goods arrive and waste is disposed of. They are generally unseen by the public, operating at night, filled with the shadows and the low rumble of trucks and machinery. These tunnels are a complex concrete network, a perfect stand-in for the Minotaur's labyrinth. They run for hundreds of meters beneath the street level, connecting the mall to the outside world only for the purposes of logistics. It was in these dark, echoing tunnels that security guards and sanitation workers, the unseen heroes and witnesses of the mall's underbelly, claimed to hear the most unsettling sounds: the heavy, dragging movement, the sounds of metallic objects being disturbed, and the occasional, inexplicable rush of wind through the confined space. Third, and most important, the deepest basement level parking and the reinforced door. In most major Philippine malls, the parking levels descend several stories below ground. These levels grow progressively darker, less occupied, and more oppressive the further down you go. The lowest level, often labeled B3 or B4, is where the story finds its climax. It's here, in the cold, echoing concrete tomb, that the rumors consistently place the reinforced steel door, the unholy entryway to the serpent's lair. This door was often near the massive humming generators, a place where no casual shopper would ever venture, making it easy for the imagination to fill the void with unspeakable horror. It became the gate to the subterranean kingdom, guarded by industrial machinery and the threat of electrocution, the perfect modern defenses for an ancient beast. The story of the mall serpent also gained traction due to a specific theological insight woven into the narrative, the concept of a tainted foundation. In many Philippine cultural beliefs, great works of construction, bridges, skyscrapers, and even very old houses require a form of offering or sacrifice to the land spirits or elemental beings, anito or encanto, to ensure stability and success. This is often referred to as a blood offering or pasubo. Historically, this belief stems from genuine fear of the raw, unpredictable nature of the earth. When the Catholic faith integrated with these older beliefs, the practice was not fully eliminated, it was merely demonized. The modern serpent myth is a chilling fusion of these two ideas. The wealthy, amoral tycoon is not sacrificing to a gentle anito for stability, he is offering blood to a demonic pagan entity, the mall serpent, for unlimited, unnatural wealth. This shift makes the sin corporate and theological. It suggests that the success of Victory Central Mall is not a blessing but a curse paid for in innocent lives. The myth's deep appeal lies in its power to authenticate the skepticism of the poor. The idea that all great wealth must be bought with a secret, immoral price is a comforting narrative for those who struggle. It suggests a hidden, cosmic justice for the economic disparity they witness daily. And the memory of Cecilia Reyes Dizon, the missing 18-year-old, further anchors this theological fear. She wasn't simply a victim of crime, she was the sacrificial lamb to the Moloch of capitalism. Her youth and innocence made her a perfect symbol for the purity being consumed by the greed of the new age. The sheer scale of the mall, its depth, and its complexity were not just setting details, they were active participants in the horror. The mall was so vast, so labyrinthine, that the idea of a secret room and an unseen monster seemed not only plausible but inevitable. It was too big to be fully known, too complex to be entirely clean. The story of the Serpent of the Mall is not just about a creature. It is about the profound cultural and spiritual cost of modernity and unchecked progress. It asks us to question what dark, secret pacts were made beneath the polished tiles and neon signs to bring this new, glittering age to life. As we prepare to transition into the final haunting thoughts on this tale, I want to take a moment to ask for your continued engagement with the show. We love seeing how these stories resonate globally. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts, mini episodes, and updates on our current research projects. You'll find all the links in the show description. The Mal Serpan myth wasn't complete without a villain, a human face to pair with the reptilian horror. The rumors inevitably centered on the Mal's proprietor, a real estate mogul whose name, for the purposes of this narrative, we will change to Don Rafael Villamor Sarmiento. He was the perfect, terrifyingly modern antagonist, immensely rich, politically connected, and maintaining an almost unnerving secrecy about his personal life. The narrative of the serpent's creation and sustenance became inextricably linked to Don Rafael. The stories claimed that he, Don Rafael, was the human-looking twin, the one who stepped into the light of society, while his monstrous brother, the serpent, was immediately hidden away in the mall's foundation. This arrangement cast Don Rafael not as a normal businessman, but as a sorcerer, CEO, who commanded a powerful entity channeling the serpent's primal energy and insatiable hunger into corporate success. This concept of a powerful human exploiting a monstrous entity is not new. It's a global folkloric concept. Think of the European tales of pacts with the devil or Faustian bargains, where an individual sells their soul or a close relation for wealth and power. In the Filipino context, it echoes the stories of the mangkukulam or sorcerers who wield dark power by serving a demon, or demonyo, often in exchange for material gain. Don Rafael Villamor Sarmiento therefore became the modern-day mangkukulam, operating not in a dark hut in the province, but in a gleaming skyscraper above the consumption capital of Manila. The details of the serpent's capture or confinement were wildly imaginative. Some stories claim that the creature was born so large that the mall was literally built around its cage, its reinforced steel layer being the single most expensive and crucial component of the entire structure. Others suggested a ritualistic capture, where a powerful indigenous shaman was forced to bind the serpent to the land, an act that would guarantee wealth but require continuous, bloody sustenance. The story was also fueled by the subtle yet pervasive rumors that circulated within Don Rafael's own inner circle. One such persistent tale involved his security detail. It was whispered that Don Rafael maintained a small, highly paid, and ruthlessly loyal private security team, whom we will call the Guardians of the Basement. Their duty was not to protect Don Rafael, but to silence whispers and, more chillingly, to handle the logistics of the sacrifices. A former security contractor, whom we'll call Romeo de la Cruz Manalo, claimed to have worked on the mall's initial construction in the late 1990s. He spoke only once, in a drunken state at a remote provincial bar, about an area of the lowest basement that was always under guard, even during non-working hours. He claimed they were specifically told, under pain of immediate dismissal and veiled threats, never to look at the security monitors that covered that one section. Romeo's story, filtered through the intense desire for proof, quickly entered the public narrative as the confirmation of a physical cage. This element of a powerful cover-up transformed the urban legend from a simple ghost story into a sophisticated critique of political and corporate corruption. The serpent was the symptom, Don Rafael was the disease. The sheer power of the mogul meant the police were useless, and the press was only interested in sensationalism, not truth. The only way to comprehend the horror was through the language of folklore and the supernatural. The disappearance of young women like Cecilia Riaz Dezon fit the pattern of the monstrous guard's appetite perfectly. In a dark poetic twist, the most attractive and vital young employees were the most desirable offering, symbolizing the ultimate consumption of innocence by the corporate machine. The serpent was not eating people, it was eating potential. It was eating the future of the working class to fuel the opulence of the elite. The theological and moral dimension of this story also touches upon the idea of cursed wealth. Catholic teachings often warn against the worship of material goods and the pursuit of endless riches. The serpent of the Mal became a living, breathing demon of greed, a warning that wealth acquired through unholy means is fundamentally stained and requires eternal payment. It was a modern parable about the dangers of unchecked capitalism, a moral lesson wrapped in scales and myth. Even today, years after the initial panic, the image of the serpent remains a powerful, lingering presence. If you mention the name of Victory Central Mall in certain circles, someone will inevitably lower their voice and whisper about the basement. The myth is now a permanent part of the mall's cultural history, an unspoken rule of engagement with the place. Enjoy the air conditioning, buy your goods, but always remember what lies beneath your feet. The story of the Mal Serpent is the story of a community desperate for an explanation, for justice, and for a powerful metaphor that could contain their anxieties about rapid, unequal change. We are now heading towards the conclusion of our investigation, examining the lingering questions and the ultimate truth, or lack thereof, behind this terrifying urban legend. Ngon Beba. But before we proceed, a final reminder, these tales are more than just stories. They are cultural reflections. We encourage you to help us keep this library of Filipino folklore alive and thriving. You can find all the show notes and various support options in the description of this episode. Your patronage is the most powerful tool we have against the creeping darkness of forgetting. The myth of the Mal Serpent did not exist in a vacuum. It was a powerful, dark reaction to the cultural shift sweeping the Philippines in the late 1990s and early 2000s. This period was characterized by a massive influx of global consumer culture, and the malls were the physical embodiment of this new era. The mall was marketed as a place of safety, cleanliness, and modernity, a controlled environment superior to the often chaotic streets and markets. It promised a kind of democratized luxury, a place where both the wealthy and the working class could enjoy the same air conditioning and watch the same imported films. Yet this promise was inherently unstable, and the serpent myth perfectly destabilized it. The monster in the basement exposed the lie that the new prosperity was neither clean nor safe, and that the hierarchy of power was still rigid and ruthless. Culturally, the serpent serves as a profound expression of xenophobia, the fear of the foreign or the unknown. While the mall was built by Filipino capital, its aesthetic and commercial DNA was heavily influenced by American and international corporate models. The creature, the half-man, half-beast hybrid, is the visual metaphor for the corrupted hybrid culture being forced upon the nation. It is neither wholly Filipino nor wholly foreign. It is a monstrous mutation of the two, consuming the very people it was supposed to serve. This fear echoes historical traumas. For centuries, the Philippines experienced colonization, where foreign powers extracted resources and labor from the local populace. The serpent myth psychologically replicates this dynamic. The corporate entity is the new colonizer, and the human sacrifices are the modern form of extractive labor. The money earned at the mall, the very foundation of this new economy, is literally tainted by blood. The cultural belief systems of the Philippines are rich with concepts of elemental justice and land ownership. Historically, to take land without proper respect or recompense, especially if that land was an ancestral burial ground or a site sacred to nature's spirits, invited spiritual retribution. The popular rumor that Victory Central Mall was built on an old, disrespected cemetery ties directly into this. The serpent in this light is not just a greedy monster. It is the vengeful spirit of the land itself, roused by the disrespect of the builders and demanding payment for the disturbance of the dead. This provides a traditional moral justification for the horror. The Mal deserved to be haunted. Its very existence was an affront to the spiritual order. In terms of international parallels, this fear is fascinatingly widespread. In Thailand, there are urban legends of powerful businessmen who made pacts with dark spirits to fill their buildings with customers. In many parts of Europe, the medieval practice of foundation sacrifice, where it was believed a building would only stand if a human or animal was sealed within its walls, slingers in folklore. Mansurshokmet is the hyper-modern application of the foundation sacrifice. The building is permanent, the wealth is endless, but the sacrifice must be continuous. The narrative also subtly plays on the theme of gendered violence and vulnerability. The victims are overwhelmingly young women, often low-wage employees. This targets a demographic that is already economically and socially vulnerable in a patriarchal society. The serpent myth highlights the terrifying reality that in a highly unequal economic structure, the lives of the young and the working class are often disposable, easily erased by powerful men. The myth gives a visceral form to this painful truth. The media coverage was a masterclass in exploiting this cultural anxiety. Tabloids didn't merely report the rumor, they co-created it, using evocative language and half-truths to sell papers. They would interview eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen strange shapes moving in the service corridors, or former employees who spoke of unusual delivery schedules late at night. The line between journalism and folklore completely dissolved, turning the newsstand into a distribution point for shared terror. The widespread consumption of these lurid stories was less about a belief in a literal snake man and more about the collective desire to air a socio-economic grievance. The ultimate tragedy, the unsolved disappearance of Cecilia Reyes Dizon, remained the anchor of the legend. In the absence of a body and a definitive explanation, the serpent myth provided a kind of cultural memorial. Her story, amplified by the terror, became a permanent warning etched into the consciousness of every Filipino who walked into a modern shopping complex. She became a martyr to the cause of anti-greed, a face on the price tag of progress. It is important to recognize that the Mall Serpent, while a fantasy, articulated a very real truth about the darker side of development. It forced a conversation, albeit a hysterical and myth-laden one, about power, corruption, and the spiritual cost of capitalism. And we are nearing the conclusion of this episode, but before we proceed to the final reflective thoughts, let me extend one last important invitation. We rely on the generous support of our listeners to research and produce these deep dives into Filipino history and horror. You can learn how to find all the show notes and support options in the description of this episode. Every contribution helps us preserve these vital stories. Years passed since the initial wave of hysteria in 2005. Victory Central Mall continued to thrive, its immense air-conditioned spaces filled daily with shoppers. Don Rafael Villamor Sarmiento, the alleged human twin and proprietor, lived out his life in luxurious seclusion, never directly addressing the rumors, which, ironically, only fueled their persistence. The serpent myth, however, never truly vanished. It simply retreated from the front pages of the tabloids to the hushed corners of online forums and late-night conversations. The ultimate fate of the mall serpent, from a purely factual standpoint, is defined by one undeniable truth. No physical proof of the creature ever materialized. No credible witness ever provided a verifiable account. No biological evidence, like shed scales or unusual droppings, was ever confirmed by law enforcement or reputable scientific bodies. The serpent remains definitively a creature of urban legend. Yet, dismissing the story as merely false misses the profound, complex social truth it represented. The mall serpent was real in its impact, real in the fear it generated, and real in its function as a cultural outlet for societal pressures. The case of Cecilia Reyes Dizon also offers a tragic, non-supernatural truth that often gets lost in the scales and the whispers. Police investigations at the time were hampered by a lack of initial evidence and the chaos of the public rumor mill. The eventual official conclusion, though widely disputed by the family and the press, leaned toward the possibility of a non-Ma disappearance, perhaps a private conflict, a death, or a voluntary departure. The lack of closure meant the door to the supernatural explanation was permanently wedged open. The serpent became the most convenient, if terrible, alibi for a failed investigation and a deeply grieving family. The story forced a reckoning with the concept of accountability. In the eyes of the public, if there was no snake man, then the only remaining villain was the powerful tycoon, Don Rafael, and the system he represented. The myth, by focusing on a monster, allowed the public to discuss the evils of corporate power without directly confronting the individual. A safer form of protest. In the years following the peak of the panic, the mall management, realizing the depth of the public fear, took subtle but significant steps. They increased transparency in their employee hiring and safety protocols. They occasionally offered public, if brief, tours of the lower basement levels, carefully curated, of course, to demonstrate the mundane reality of industrial machinery and maintenance pipes. These efforts were a tacit acknowledgement of the legend's existence and an attempt to replace the horrifying narrative with a boring, functional one. The serpent myth, at its core, is a timeless story of the shadow of progress. Every great leap forward in human history, from the building of ancient pyramids to the rise of modern financial empires, has been shadowed by stories of dark prices paid, hidden victims, and moral compromises. In the Philippines, the serpent of the mall is the cultural price paid for the air-conditioned, glittering promise of globalization. It asks a chilling, reflective question of every consumer. When you enjoy the fruits of immense, seemingly boundless success, what and who paid the ultimate unseen price? The serpent doesn't have to be real to teach this terrifying lesson. The monster is the metaphor for the human heart corrupted by limitless wealth. We begin this journey by entering a bright new mall, and now we leave its basement, understanding that the greatest horrors are often those created not by magic but by men and the systems they build. The fear of the aswang or the manananggal feeding in the darkness has been replaced by the fear of the invisible, predatory hand of power that takes what it wants with impunity. The chilling legend of the cryptid of the cafeteria remains one of the most compelling modern myths of the Philippines, a perfect blend of folklore, historical anxiety, and mass psychology. It is a story that refuses to be ignored, hissing its warning from the deep, dark places beneath the glass and concrete. And as you reflect on this tale of unchecked power and lingering fear, remember that your own encounters with the unexplained or the historically strange can find a home here. Do not forget to submit your own stories at stories@philippines.com and let your voice be heard from the hidden corners of the archipelago. We have journeyed through the bright lights and the deep, metaphorical shadows of Victory Central Mall. We have seen how ancient serpent folklore, from the celestial Bakunawa to the subterranean Naga, was seamlessly repurposed to articulate the anxieties of a rapidly modernizing nation in the early 2000s. The masked serpent, the cryptid of the cafeteria, is a masterpiece of collective psychological projection. The story highlights the profound difference between evidence and truth. Evidence, such as police reports and scientific readings of the basement, offered nothing but the truth, the psychological and cultural truth that the powerful elite were capable of unspeakable acts to maintain their position was validated by the story of the serpent. The monster became a truth teller, operating in the domain of myth where facts fail and silence reigns. Consider the power dynamics once more. The serpent lived in the basement, the foundation. The successful human twin lived at the top, in the penthouse. This vertical stratification of horror is a perfect map of social inequality. The wealthy thrive at the expense of the hidden darkness below, which is sustained by the sacrifice of the vulnerable. Every single person who entered the mall was complicit in this consumption, standing on the very roof of the serpent's lair. The disappearance of Cecilia Reyes Dizon remains a dark asterisk in the history of this urban legend. She was a real person with a real family whose memory was tragically absorbed and repurposed by the myth. Her story serves as the final, somber reminder that behind every grand, fantastical horror, there is often a very small, very human tragedy. And the greatest terror is not the creature in the dark, but the possibility that a vast, powerful structure can simply erase a life and continue its operations without pause. Zamal's serpent has become immortal in the landscape of modern Filipino fear. It stands alongside the classic aswang and the tiyanak, but is far more insidious. Those creatures operated in the dark corners of the countryside. The serpent operates in the brightest, most public place imaginable. It is the monster of the 21st century, sleek, hidden by technology, and feeding on the expendable. The narrative we have explored is a testament to the resilience of human storytelling in the face of radical change. When the official answers are lacking, when the system seems rigged, and when fear is the only shared currency, the community will always generate a powerful, terrifying myth to explain the impossible. They will find the scales, they will hear the hiss, and they will point their fear at the darkest corner of the brightest room. The foundation of the mall is deep, and the secrets it keeps are even deeper. We have finished our exploration of the cryptid of the cafeteria. We've looked at the history, the folklore, the psychology, and the cultural reverberations of the mall serpent. Thank you for listening to this episode of Stories Philippines podcast. I am Paul. Before you go, I want to leave you with one final thought. When we seek to debunk a monster, are we truly seeking facts or are we just trying to silence the terrifying truth it represents? Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with those who love a blend of history and horror. Support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes and help us continue to bring these essential Filipino stories out of the shadows. Join us next time as we delve into another forgotten corner of Filipino history and folklore. I am Paul, and this is Stories Philippines Podcast.